Hi, this is Tom Tresser, your friendly civic educator and public defender. Today I want to share with you a video about the culture wars from the early 90s and Chicago's amazing role in it, and my small but significant role in that. At the first part of our online discussion this morning, we discussed amongst the attendees their burning issues. What makes them angry? Why would they get up out of their seats and fight? It was a great discussion, but I wanted to get right into the content for the purposes of this online video.
We could spend really the rest
Thank
of our time together just going around the horn, and people can unpack what I call your burning issue. All right, and it's everybody has different variations on that theme, but this is where all this work starts. Everything I'm talking about, everything that I'm proposing to do going forward, always starts with your heart, your civic heart. What gets you mad, and how much are you going to take? And then are you going to be a lone actor, a lone complainer, or somehow do you magnify yourself and collaborate and get in with others that feel the same way with you? This is at the heart of everything that we're going to be talking about. All right. So, so who this guy is. That's Muhammad Ali. Of course, the great athlete, probably one of the most famous people on the planet. But a fighter, literally, but also obviously a fighter for civil rights, human rights, etc. But who's this lady, Candace Dennard? She's a youngster from the south side of Chicago who got involved in the community campaign to build a Class A trauma center on the south side because her brother was shot and died because it took too long to get him care. He was moved to a trauma center that could take care of his bullet wound up at Northwestern, and he's down on the south side, and so he perished. So Candace became a leader of something called FLY, Fearless Leading Youth. And I would say for about 10 years, they organized and disrupted, and they chanted outside the president of the University of Chicago's house. They laid down in the street until they got a Class 1 trauma center reopened just like 2 years ago. So that's who Candace Dennard is, and that's what she was fighting for. So that's a little bit about the fighting. So now we're going to get into it. So what was the culture wars? I guess there's a lot been written about culture wars in America, culture going all the way back to the 1800s and various religious revivals. People have talked about the conflict between urban and rural living, between the North and the South, between the East and the West, between the young and the old, between the people with the long hair, the hippies, like I used to have, and the straights and all that. But for the sake of our conversation, I'm going to be talking about the fight to defund the arts and the National Endowment for the Arts in the 90s. That's the culture wars I'm talking about. But this guy, Pat Buchanan, also chimed in, and this is what he said at the Republican National Convention in 1992.
Religious war going on, and what we stand for as Americans. There is a religious war going on in this country. It is a cultural war as critical to the kind of nation we shall be as the Cold War itself, for this war is for the soul of America. And in that struggle for the soul of America, Clinton and Clinton are on the other side, and George Bush is on our side.
All right, so you get the picture, Mr. Mr. Buchanan there. That really sort of brought the culture wars into I guess, popular parlance. I mean, he addressed millions of people on that night. Okay. So here is my basic, I guess you could say, civic equation that is sort of driving my pedagogy and my analysis. It starts with message, members, money, and means in that order. So if you're trying to build something that's going to capture America's imagination or the popular imagination and move into political action, to change significant things, in our legislation, in our courts, in our conduct of, I guess, popular life, you've got to follow this path. You've got to have a compelling message that resonates with people, and so you're perhaps communicating the thing that you're angry about, your burning issue. You have to articulate it in such a way that it resonates with me and makes me mad. So, I wasn't mad about that until you articulated, and now I somehow see, oh, right, I should get mad about that too. So now I'm mad with you. And the way you do that, and the better you do that, the more likely I'm ready to become a member. I'm likely to affiliate and say, yes, I will join you in this cause to either stop something bad from happening or make something good happen. And then and only then will I give you money, and or my time or treasure. And if we do it well enough and long enough and in a concerted and strategic way, then we're going to create the means by which this can be sustained past my particular attention span or even my lifespan. So that's what we mean by means. The other thing is what I call the ladder of participation. This is articulated by Sherry Arnstein, a sociologist, and she is an amazing person. And this is her information right here. What we're talking about here is moving people up from being bystanders to co-creators, essentially. And so at the bottom of the ladder, you're a bystander, you're being manipulated, and you move up the ladder to being someone who is a co-creator or collaborator. And this ladder was created specifically with the idea of how governments work with their citizenry. Are they manipulating them? Are they informing them? Are they consulting them? Are they placating them? Is it a one-way street where, I think we've all been to community meetings where it's just a lot of talk to us. We don't really get a chance to change the story. Sometimes we're asked to comment, so we're consulted, but it's more like we're being placated in a lot of the way governments and organizations meet the public. But what we're trying to do is not just be a one-way street, we're trying to be a two-way street. And the better you are at this in your organizing, or if you're a government official, or if you're running a large organization, the more you can move up this ladder, the more I'm going to be invested and want to espouse the cause and stay with you long term. So those organizations that have succeeded in these movements and really making change have been able to move people up this ladder intentionally, so that you're moving from essentially being a bystander to eventually being actually a leader, a co-leader. And you can all reflect on your own work, in public life, and you probably all followed a similar pattern. Maybe you didn't quite have it articulated in this way, but I think you cannot be successful in public life unless you practice some version of what we call the ladder of participation. That's what I'm doing right now. All right. The message. All right, so let's talk about the message. I'm going to start with this guy, Lewis Powell. He was a tobacco lawyer in the 60s and early 70s. His neighbor was the chairman of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and he wrote what is called the Powell Memo. This Powell Memo explained the dangers that Lewis Powell felt that the American capitalist system was under. You can see this is dated August 23rd, 1971, directed to the Chamber of Commerce. And he's basically saying, look what's going on in America. We have this huge civil rights movement. It's turning people upside down. We have the anti-war movement threatening our fight against communism. Remember, this is the height of the Cold War. We have the women's movement turning our families upside down. We have these young people, these hippies, sort of questioning our lifestyles, our religious beliefs. So he's very worried, and he's saying, what concerns us is quite new in the history of America. We are not dealing with sporadic or isolated attacks from a very relatively few extremists. Rather, the assault is on the enterprise system is broadly based and consistently pursued, it is gaining momentum and converts. He's basically saying, our entire capitalist system is under threat. This memo landed. The Chamber of Commerce then moved from New York City to Washington, where today it is the largest business organization on the planet with 2023 revenues of $197 million. One of the things that Lewis Powell suggested was you've got to move to Washington and start influencing legislation. Influencing legislation. Don't let the laws be written without the input of the American business community. And guess what? Just in federal elections alone, several $billions have been spent just in the last few years, let alone since 1970s. This is just for federal elections, my friends. We're not even talking about state and local elections and other sort of dark money pits that can't even be calculated. So the business community took Mr. Powell to heart, but he also said we have to win the hearts and minds of the American public. So you've got to be on the college campuses. We have to sponsor PR. We have to have influence the media. You see what I mean? We need to win public opinion, or as he said, the hearts and minds. Well, that happened as well, as you well know. And for his a major thought leadership, Mr. Powell was put on the Supreme Court by President Nixon, where he served for many years, being a very strong voice for the business community, writing many decisions and concurring in many others. What is the other message that is dominating our times? And that is the Christian Bible, but a particularly nasty version of it. My wife and I, we're of the Jewish persuasion, but she's took the Great Books class at the University of Chicago. She often tells me, I read that book. And I don't know what book they're talking about when we are talking about the other side here. But in any case, this book is believed to be the written word of God, and that every word in this book is true and to be believed without question. And according to the article, The Christian Coalition and the Endgame, from the Journal of the Adventist Theological Society, the new Christian right is out to Christianize America. Randall Terry, founder of Operation Rescue, which was a famous organization that fought women's right to have abortion, challenged the following thing. He said, our goal is a Christian nation. We have a biblical duty. We are called by God to conquer this country. Now, the organization that I've been looking at for many, many, many years is the Christian Coalition. They call themselves one of the largest conservative grassroots political organizations in America. They have modest revenues today, but they've been punching way above their weight for about 30 years. And they've spawned many competitors and copiers, so there are many other organizations like them. You can see that's Pat Robertson holding Bob Dole's hand in 1988. Fast forward a generation, and there he is giving support to Donald Trump's first campaign for president in 2016. He wrote a book in 1991 called The New World Order. This is Reverend Pat Robertson, where he says we must rebuild the foundation of a free, sovereign America from the grassroots, precinct by precinct, city by city, state by state. He told us what he was going to do, and then he did it. As I mentioned, he's only one of a constellation of many what I call far-right or Christian evangelical groups that are playing in politics. There's the Traditional Values Coalition of the Reverend Louis Sheldon, the Christian Broadcasting Network, which is again started by Reverend Robertson and sold to ABC Broadcasting. The Family Research Council by Tony Perkins, Focus on the Family by James Dobson, and the American Family Association, Donald Wildman. These all, as you can see, older white men all played key roles in the culture wars. They were all major players along with many politicians. Another way that leads to what I call the means to keep this thing going throughout time, you can see the Christian coalitions had a leadership school. All right, this is a flyer from 1992. Think like Jesus, lead like Moses, fight like David, run like Lincoln from 1992. The Leadership Institute was set up in 1979. It says, become a leader for America. The Leadership Institute will give you the training, resources, and mentorships to shape the future of our country. 2022 revenues of $38 million. But this is for people who want to lead from a conservative and Christian point of view. So when you go to their website, you say, I want to be and then you just pick what your journey is. I want to be a political candidate. I want to be an activist, a leader, a Christian leader, a journalist, a student journalist. And when you do that, you're offered classes and workshops. They do over 200 a year, and they're very, very good at what they do. I am so jealous. But since their founding, they've graduated hundreds of thousands of students, including some of the most influential, powerful, and effective organizers on the right, such as Grover Norquist, Ralph Reed, Jeff Gannon, Senators Mitch McConnell, and the former Vice President, Mike Pence. If you don't know who those folks are, you just Google them. You will be astounded at how important this organization, the Leadership Institute, is. And I have to say, we on the, I don't know what, the other side, the creative side, the progressive side, whatever you want to call us, the people who believe in science, human rights, dignity, inclusion, equity, whatever, however we band ourselves together, we don't got anything like this. Nothing like this. All right. Now we're ready to get into the culture wars. Okay, there was a group of artists called the NEA 4. There were Karen Finley, John Fleck, Holly Hughes, and Tim Miller. All working artists in the late 80s, early 90s, many of them still working to this day. Their work had a political, controversial maybe, perhaps sexual edge. They combined visual arts with performing arts. And they were performing in different spaces, and sometimes they would be in a regular museum, but other times there might be more raw kind of spaces. And they all received modest grants from the National Endowment for the Arts. However, the chairman of the NEA back in the day, John Frohnmayer, vetoed those 4 grants, can't get them, and sparked this controversy about should public money, in this case from the National Endowment for the Arts, go to fund artists whose work might offend somebody. And if you were so offended, could you then somehow cancel them? Like I was offended by Holly Hughes' performance, take away her money, right? And that's what was on the table. The politicians picked up on it, as did those religious leaders. There were, of course, 2 other big artists who were in the fray. You may remember Robert Mapplethorpe and Andres Serrano. Don't have time to go into them. Amazing artists, but their work also highly controversial, but also received public funding. So between these 6 artists, that was sort of the eye of the hurricane, let's call it that. Now, let's talk about a specific incident, the Christian Coalition at work. In 1991, there was an exhibit called Sense and Shivers at the Valencia Community College in Orlando. And the Valencia Community College had received some public money from the Florida Arts Council. And here was an exhibit of work that contained some religious imagery and some other imagery that became the focus of a controversy. The artist was Bill Paul from Athens, Georgia. And you can see a little bit about his artistic statement there. Well, we'll hear a little bit about how this thing got started, but you can see the letter that was sent by the Christian Coalition. We must protest this outrageous use of your tax dollars to fund pornography and Christian bashing now. This is from the Florida Christian Coalition attacking this specific exhibit. And this is the second letter that went out, um, from the state director of the Christian Coalition to the state senators, in Tallahassee there. The enclosed photographs are pictures of a quote art exhibit on display at Valencia Community College. The total cost of over $6,000 to pay for the artwork came through a grant from the Division of Cultural Affairs. Uh, and basically, I can imagine how confused our children would be when our leaders condone this type of display with state tax money and turn around and wonder why there is an AIDS epidemic. So basically, I'm asking the state senator to cancel this whole public funding thing. Oh, and by the way, if you agree, send me some money. So this is how the far right started building their organizational chops. They raised tens of millions of dollars. This is just one campaign of many that we've tracked across the country. Now we're going to turn the mic over to Judith, and I'll stop sharing in a second. But Judith will tell us a little bit about what the heck happened, and what she experienced. And
Okay. Well, when I took the job at Valencia Community College, as it was at that time, as gallery director and curator, what I wanted to do is to change what had been a very sort of safe program that had seascapes and things like you might expect to get from Florida. And I really wanted to address the political, social aspects that could be brought out in the art world, and using new media, not oil paints particular, or various found objects that made it all come together in a very exciting way. And also to address what was going on in the world at that very time, including the AIDS epidemic and censorship of anyone talking about anything that was out of line, according to the Christian Coalition. So I met an artist named Bill Paul, as you know, from Atlanta, Georgia, and I just became entranced with his work. I thought, this is something I really feel is important to show. And he agreed to do an entire installation in our gallery. And the show opened, and people were very supportive of it, until a secretary from Valencia College came in to see the show, and she was horrified, and she called the Christian radio station, which there was at least two, but I think more than that. And so they informed the Christian Coalition and got them involved. And so that's when they decided, they got a grant that was not only funded from the Florida Council for the Arts, but also they received money from the NEA. So it was sort of 2 points of dismay by these people. They were just like really horrified of it. And so anyhow, after this whole thing opened up, the Christian radio stations just wouldn't stop. And but the interesting thing is we never had so many people visit our gallery. So it's like a huge amount of people. I had great support from all of the colleges throughout Florida, and many other organizations as well. So they were behind us, and but and these letters continue to be addressed to the Arts Council in Tallahassee, and the governor was involved, but he didn't really do anything. He just didn't support it, but he didn't say, I'm going to take back the money, I'm going to try and get the money back. So eventually, this carried on for a year. We were attacked continuously, and it took about a year for it to really quiet down. And it was Ralph Reed was the one who was leading the Christian Coalition at that time. And so, but I have to say that People for the American Way and the ACLU got involved very close to the beginning of all of this. And they were very supportive, and they called me almost every day to see how I was doing. I think they were afraid that I would be fired. And I wasn't really worried about her. I just didn't think that would happen, but you never know. That's what these people were demanding. And I tried to reach out to people. People would come into the gallery, and I would say, well, would you like to know more about the artist and the meaning of these works, and really talk to them? And they didn't want to hear it. Their ears were totally closed to anything I had to say. And in fact, what they told me is the Bible has everything we need to know in it, so we don't need to listen to what you have to say or what the art has to say. And so after a year, actually, I left and moved to New York, where I still am today. But people still remember it, and there were some major articles, like the Sentinel Star in Orlando had a great, in their weekly magazine, Sunday magazine, they highlighted it. So there was a lot of support for what we did.
Awesome, awesome story, Judith. But just in your final thought, knowing that this kind of attacks happened all over the country, what do you think the net effect was on support for the arts in America?
Well, obviously there was an effect, because there are no individual artist grants given out. And I mean, that was one offshoot of it. And of course, now I think there's going to be no money for the arts. It's like being attacked everywhere. I mean, even now is a lot more serious than anything that we had to endure at the time. But it was everything quieted down and went well until well, it was all simmering underground, so to speak.
Well, I'd say the simmering is now erupted into a volcano. Thank you so much, Judith, for visiting us and sharing. So let's see again the Christian Coalition at work. Well, this is an example of a voting guide the Christian Coalition published in upstate Illinois, around the Rockford area, and they published millions of these, customized for the states they were in. And basically, this says the Representative John Cox, who was the Democratic incumbent, he is accused of being in favor of tax funds for obscene art, because he gets an S support because he voted to support the NEA. So a vote to support the NEA got translated by the Christian Coalition into the affirmation, this person is for tax funds for obscene art. Whereas opponent, Don Manzullo, is opposed to it. So this voting guide was in the order of service in churches, as well as under the windshield in the cars in the parking lots in churches all over America. You can also see the way the other positions are articulated. Are you for or against abortion on demand? John Cox is. Are you for raising income taxes? John Cox is. Are you for homosexual rights? John Cox is, and Don Mazzolo is not. Okay? So if that's all you know about the incumbent and the person challenging him, and this wording is designed to sort of hit your civic nerve system, you're going to respond. And that's what happened. John Cox lost the race. He was a firm supporter of human rights, environmental rights, women's rights, and labor. He was fired. Don Mazzolo took his place and was there for a decade, more than that. And he was a very conservative member of the House of Representatives and was a leader in many of the issues that I think we would find we would be opposed to. But that's what he did as a leader in the House of Representatives. Okay, what else do these guys do? In Anchorage, Alaska, the Christian Coalition found another group that they didn't like. It was called the Out North Theater. This theater was started by people who were gay or identified in a different way and made work and made plays and featured artwork and other artistic content. And they were called the Gay Theater. This again is in the mid-1990s. So they were attacked by the Christian Coalition. And here you see is a candidate for mayor, again, the same kind of voting guide. So Tom Fink is supporting the funding of the theater. So it says here, do you oppose taxpayer funding for the Out North Theater, a gay theater? Tom Fink says, yes, I am. His opponent, no. Again, charged and loaded to get me to a vote for Mr. Fink, and he was the mayor, and he was returned to office. So this is the Christian Coalition of Alaska. Again, these voting guides, very powerful, very effective. And you can see from November of 1997, the Anchorage Assembly on Tuesday eliminated the city funding for the Out North Theater, a move that some assembly members have been pushing for. Out North loses its funding. So again, this theater company, again, a small, modest, nonprofit, is embroiled in controversy for a year, sucks the energy out of them. It's demoralizing. I mean, they have to fight a back hill going up the hill backwards with a weight. They can't attend to their work, their art. They're fighting for their survival. It's a very nasty situation, and it caused people to move out of the state. I mean, that's how bad it was. The Christian Coalition does much more than this. They have an annual conference called the Road to Victory, and that conference, every major Republican candidate who seeks high office comes to this conference. And there you see in 1999, Governor George Bush addressing the conference and getting a lot of love and shoring up his candidacy, eventually winning the presidency. In 2002, you can see they're still around to this day. All right, let's switch gears. Let's talk about fighting back. Okay, let's talk about the League of Chicago Theaters. I was hired by the League in 1991 to organize our campaign to save the NEA. Yay, save the NEA. Well, we in the arts had never done anything like this. So I was applying my skills as a baby organizer. I got trained by the Midwest Academy, America's foremost spot for doing community organizing. And the first thing that the League did was a direct mail piece to 10,000 people. What was unprecedented about this is that the three theaters, the Goodman, the Steppenwolf, and Victory Gardens, combined their subscriber and donor mailing list for the first, and I probably think only time in history, to do this 10,000 piece mailing. And it was basically asking people to sign a petition card, return it to us, and then we would send it on to our senators and the President of the United States. It'll look like this. It's like a very, very nicely designed piece signed by Roque Schulfer, who was the chair of the advocacy committee of the league for whom I worked, and of course, the longtime head of the Goodman Theater, just recently retired. So you can see, a lot of like, do this, don't, the NEA is important, articulating the reasons for why you should join us. And here's the actual action piece that asked people to sign it, and there was one to the president and there was one to the senator, and of course we asked for money. This was the first time, and maybe the only time, that an arts group asked for a non-deductible donation. Okay, because this is political work, this is civic work. There was an insert piece. Frank Galati just won a Tony for the Steppenwolf's production of Grapes of Wrath, and so there was like a little thing in there, like, don't throw this away, kind of an insert. And then there was yet another insert. Here's the 123 members of the league. How many have you attended? So again, we're educating the people about the industry, about the power and breadth of the arts industry, which we have really done very, 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 very poor job of it. Think of it this way, friends. All the millions of people that sit in our seats and come to our spaces year after year, we've wasted the opportunity to educate them and bring us to a higher understanding of our problems and our issues. Our complete communication to our patrons and our best friends have been simply visit me. So all the times that people have sit in your seats and they're looking at your programs and they're getting your mailings, we've wasted the opportunity to inform them about the power of creativity, the power of the arts, the power of creativity in the economy, democracy, the economy, and the arts and health. Think of all the things that you know about the power of the arts and creativity from your own experience and studies, but none of that has been transmitted to our patrons. We also did program stuffers for 2 weekends. The lights would go down. The stage manager would come out and say, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to keep the lights on for the theaters in America, sign the card in your program and drop it in the box on the way out. Very dramatic. We're going to trade the NEA. But here's a learning. A lot of people turned to each other and said, the NEA, that's the national education with the teachers, right? What is that? What do we have to do with that? So we failed to even educate our people about what the NEA was. That's how below water we were. But again, you can see the thing that we asked people to sign and leave in the lobby. We did training sessions. We try to teach our fellow administrators the basics of organizing. And I have taught community organizing the last 20 years. I've taught thousands of people how to be organizers, how to run for office, and much more. But you can see here we did 3 meetings in different parts of the city all the way back in 1991. We did a rally, old school rally with major performers and performances and speakers in Daley Plaza, and it got really great press. This is back in early September of 1990. Don't mess with art. Stop cultural fascism. I mean, you could just take those signs out, right? Get them out of the closet and take them back downtown. The same messages apply. All right, we're getting to the close here. What is the results? Well, in 1992, the New York Times had a headline, Christian conservative counting hundreds of gains in local races. Fast forward 30 years, the front page of the New York Times says, on the far right, devout efforts to get elected. The percentage of adult voters who voted for Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential race, you can see people who identified as evangelical, huge portion, 81% of people who identified themselves as evangelical voted for Trump. That's the answer, my friends, in a nutshell, of why we are where we are. The other side has succeeded in galvanizing more of their people to do their political bidding, to carry the day for their values than we have for ours. That's really the punchline. The results also was the insurrection that we all witnessed a few years ago, the Confederate flag flying in the Capitol, unbelievable, people running for their lives, People lost their lives. I mean, and now these guys are pardoned. And the Christian vote carries Trump to historic victory. So this is a modern headline from 2024. Christians comprised 72% of the electorate and gave Trump 56% of the vote. White evangelicals, 80%. But overall evangelicals, 56%. Again, the numbers tell the story. The results, of course, was the inauguration of Donald Trump as the President of the United States again. All right. Question is now, are we ready to fight? Show me give me some fists or something here on the screen that you're ready to fight and take the battle on. All right, we have a second visitor with us. Matthew, you've been very patient to hang out. I'm going to turn the screen over to Matthew Brockmeyer. And you've got 5 minutes, brother, to tell your story. Who are you and what did you do?
Okay, thank you, Tom. Well, I'm going to tell my story briefly and what I did briefly, and then give you some ideas about how to proceed in other ways to exert leadership. And what I did, of course, was to serve as executive director of Chicago Music Alliance at the time that Tom was talking about working with League of Chicago Theaters. The Music Alliance actually presented Tom doing his roadshow 4 times during December 1990 and January 1991. So we were heavy into advocacy. That was part of our mission. If you read Tom's paper that he provided before the session, you saw that a lot of organizations don't advocate, and that's true, but there were some that did, and I'm proud that I was leading one of them. So we continued with our advocacy. A lot of it was focused on the more provincial aspect of Illinois Arts Council funding. We had some success in that. But I want to just give you a couple of ideas for how to go about stuff and sprinkle in a couple of supporting anecdotes here. When you get to what makes you mad, what you need to do is figure out how you are going to address that. And there are really 4 requisites in doing that. The first is to be in the room, be at the table. You're not going to get anything done if you're not. The second requisite, recognize the immediate problem or opportunity that you're confronting. The third is to recognize what you can do about that problem. And I envision this, pretty literally as seeing a door opening in front of me. And the fourth requisite is to take action. It's to walk through that door. And so, sometimes it's the arts, and I've done my share of arts advocacy, but I've also, spread myself out in other arenas. And the question of being in the room, sometimes it's a natural progression. I end up as executive director of Chicago Music Alliance. That gets me a seat at certain tables to work on arts advocacy. But sometimes you need to make your own place. One of the offshoots of that work was an effort by what was called the National Coalition for Music Education to promote music education for elementary school students and high school students. They had a state affiliate. All of these organizations were set up by 3 large entities: NARAS, the Grammy people, the Music Educators Associations, and the music instrument dealers. And so I went to the people in Chicago and said, you need a 4th door here. You need to have the Music Alliance in your corner. We're a natural part of your world. And so I got a seat at the table. I became chair of the Illinois Coalition for Music Education. And we were advocating across the state for music education programs. But we also needed to make other places, and it's another part of this. You need to have room at the table for people who aren't there who should be. In the case of the Music Educators Association, they did not have Chicago represented. They were supposed to be statewide, but they did not have Chicago in their fold. They had set up their geography to divide Chicago up between several suburban districts, and they hadn't made any outreach to the Chicago public schools. So that was part of my work there too, to make sure that Chicago was represented and was represented when all these folks went down to Springfield to lobby for the arts. The campaign to get music education into all the schools for all the students didn't really work because the organization functioned more like a protective entity for existing job holders rather than expanding the field. And so sometimes you have to be very clear about what you are doing, why, and make sure you don't fall into traps like, oh, we're comfortable with the status quo, because the status quo is not working. But there are also successes. With the Illinois Arts Council, I mentioned we had some success in keeping funding. One of the times a door opened in front of me was when Loretta and I were down in Springfield. We were there for a music education advocacy day. We'd finished up our work, so we went to hear the governor, Blagojevich, giving his first State of the State address. After the address, we buttonholed him on the way back to his office. And we said, hey, you didn't mention the Arts Council. Please don't forget about the Arts Council in your budget, right, what you're going to be producing. And he had to think a little bit. It was painful to watch Blagojevich try to think. But he thought about it for a minute. And he said, oh, the Arts Council. Oh, that's Shirley Madigan's thing. And I knew right then that we had won. So, he had put the political calculus together, and I went back and basically told our members, don't worry too much this year. It looks like we have the funding for the Arts Council, which we did. We didn't have to do the heavy lifting that year, but it was a matter of walking through that door. And I also was involved in advocacy for disability issues at about the same time. And there was another door that opened. I was on an advisory council for the state on services for people with developmental disabilities. And along came a proposal to privatize the agency. So there was a $1 billion budget. It was being administered by a state agency, and a consortium of providers were going to set up a for-profit company to administer the program for the state. With $1 billion, they were going to spend $900 million on the program, keep $100 million for themselves, literally. I mean, this is all part of what was said. And so I said, oh, no, that's not going to happen. And so I began the pushback that eventually derailed that plan. So that privatization never took place. When you do advocacy, again, in disability issues, I was board president for a large agency that was involved in providing services. We could not, as a 501c3, advocate extensively. We couldn't advocate for political candidates, but our board members could. So we did adopt a legislator. And since we covered 53 suburban communities, we had a lot of legislators that we made friends with. We gave them campaign contributions. We became good buddies. My legislative buddy was a Republican state senator, and he and I got along pretty well. He had a brother with developmental or disabilities, and so he was willing to listen, willing to work, and willing to endorse me when I later stood for public office. And not because I'm a Republican.
Okay, hey, listen, Matt, we got to jump to that. You are an effective voice and an advocate, but you took a major change later. Just tell us briefly about your stand in office.
Yep. So when I finished my work as a professional arts administrator and, effectively retired from active participation in the field, I was in 2010. The next thing I did was to attempt to run for office in the town in which we live. Town of about 1,500 people, about 40 miles north of Milwaukee. I had just finished up a stint as executive director of the Cedarburg Cultural Center north of Milwaukee. And it's one of those things where, go back to what makes you mad. And what made me mad was the way the village was being run. So I wanted a voice. And the first time I ran, I lost because it was, an old boys network. But I had campaigned, which nobody else did, and came in pretty close to getting a seat, a 3-seat race. The second year, I came back, ran again, and won, beat an incumbent. And so then I served 3 years as a village trustee. The village president and I did not get along. He was the biggest part of the problem. So I ran against him in 2015 and beat him in the primary that had to be held. And I beat him by 11 votes in the general election. And so, you don't have a lot of art stuff to do as the president of a small town in Wisconsin. But that did give me the opportunity to serve as the chair of the Library Foundation for our area. And, it also gave me an opportunity to deal with questions about privilege that show up in weird places, like my place in the boat launch line, and how the 14th Amendment does or doesn't apply to that. We're talking a lot about the impact of the Christian right. There's a Christian left also. And I've been involved with that as an officer in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And in 2019, there were some revisions proposed to the governing documents of the church, and I was not happy with them. So I saw another door open, and I made amendments to those governing documents that were approved at the church-wide assembly and ratified 3 years later, dealing with things like language about the poor and oppressed and about diversity, equity, and inclusion, making sure that was all there, baked into the governing documents of that church body.
Amazing. As I say, a journey of leadership. Thank you for sharing. We have just a few more minutes left with us, and so I want to get now to kind of another punchline, I guess you could say, of where this might be going. All right, so what we're talking about is the 100,000 Project. The 100,000 Project, my friend, is an attempt to get 100,000 servant leaders from across the country to run for office in 2026 and 2028. You can go to 100kproject.us and you'll start to see the website that we're building out there. I mean, that's only basically what the other side has done, my friends. The message is save democracy, save the arts, save freedom of expression, fill in the blank. But the means are going to be, and the methods is going to be people like us running, winning, and serving. We replayed a little bit of the history of the culture wars from the early 1990s when the far right and their allies beat the crap out of America's culture and nonprofit sector, and we took it on the chin and we lost. And to this day, it is impossible to have a robust conversation in America about serious support for the arts because of what happened then. In fact, it's even worse because I think very shortly the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities will be zeroed out, something that did not happen all those decades ago. So are you ready to fight back? If so, please go to the 100,000 Project and sign up. And more than that, can you give us a tip? $20, $50, how about $1,000? Because that's what the other side has done for decades. So if you like the message, you better become a member and be prepared to fork over some money so that we have the means to save democracy in America. So this is Tom Tresser in Chicago, signing out for the 100,000 Project. Please pitch in and do your share before it's too late.